Welcome to our panel, Racing the Random, presented to you by myself, Ravlin, and my friend here, Seto Kiaba. One of the things that I always like to start off a panel like this with is a bit of an introduction, because why the hell should you care what we have to say if you have no idea who we are? So starting off, hi, I'm Ravlin. I'm also known as Lucas by people who know me offline and not just online. I am one of the admins of the Worlds Collide community, the Final Fantasy VI Randomizer you might have seen last night at MAGFest. Yesterday morning. Time is an illusion. I'm working on it. I also have quite a bit of experience playing other randomizers, such as Free Enterprise for Final Fantasy IV, Pokemon. I've played some Time Spinner and some Super Mario RPG randomizers, and there's probably one or two others that I have played and forgotten over the course of the years. I'm also a recovering academic. I was a PhD student, and I was researching video games and culture, specifically casting and commentary, as well as how people learn through games, and also online communities and toxicity online and in and around games. So that is my background, and let Seto introduce himself to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Seto Kaiba, or Brian in my non-online life. Unlike my lovely co-host, I don't quite have a academic, pedigree. I got into speedrunning and randomizers back in probably about 2016, 2017. I remember catching Summoning Salt's history of speedruns back in 2016, some of the early ones on YouTube, and kind of falling in love with speedruns. And then when I ran into the Link to Past Randomizer, I was really enthralled with the idea that the game is different each time, and that kind of got me into it. And then back in the spring of 2021, a YouTube streamer I like named Ryukar just randomly streaming this Final Fantasy VI Randomizer, and Final Fantasy VI was my favorite game, and I'm like, I gotta check this out. And I joined the community, and they were about to host a tournament, and I hadn't run a seed yet, so I quickly ran about 4 or so, and then joined the tournament, was trial by fire, and fell in love with it. So there were 32 people, and in the qualifier, I got seeded 31 of 32, so I barely qualified, and I ended up in the top 12. So I was definitely it was really cool to really improve each and every week and all that. It was a really cool experience. And then most recently, I was in a 4-way race at Summer Games Done Quick this past summer for Final Fantasy VI Worlds Collide, the Final Fantasy VI Randomizer. And when we get to my sections, I do apologize, it will be a little more Final Fantasy VI focused. That's where all my expertise are. I'll talk about other randomizers, especially A Link to the Past, but we'll be a little more focused on that, so bear with us.
Yep. All right. Now, before I begin, I do just sort of want to gauge the audience right now. How many people have heard of or played any type of randomizer?
I think I have.
I would hope so. Awesome. Okay. So just, I do want to put through a glossary of terms just in case people aren't aware of all of them, or there are people watching online who might not know or be as familiar, just so that we're all on the same page, because the two of us are going to use these terms like they're water, and we're going to forget that other people don't know them and don't live in our brains. So first thing is, if I talk about, or one of us talks about flags, when you're going and setting up your randomizer, flags are the options that you pick. Do you want your treasure chests randomized or your shops randomized, yes or no, and how you want them. You are setting your flags. If we talk about an individual seed, that is the output of a set of flags. So you can set up all of your options, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then it will generate a seed, and you can generally generate a nigh infinite number of seeds of that particular set of options. It's not technically infinite, but then that's getting way too mathy for me. When we're playing through a randomizer, a check is any sort of location or object in the game that you are going to visit to try to find something. Whether that's another character, another item, another esper, another spell, it is something that you are looking for that gets, a check will give you a reward. Some of those rewards are going to be progression, and progression is anything that lets you move on and go further to your end goal of beating the game. And that's going to vary by randomizer. In Pokemon, that might be another badge or an HM. In Worlds Collide, that could be another character or Esper. In Free Enterprise, that could be, the Earth Crystal or the Darkness Crystal. It really depends on each randomizer, but progress is anything that pushes you forward towards your eventual goal. Anything that is a dead check is something that doesn't give you progression. In Worlds Collide, that might give you an Illumina Sword or a Ragnarok, which are awesome, but it doesn't actually help you finish the game. Like, it doesn't give you the next step towards finishing the game. It might help you, but it's not giving you that next step along the path. If you're able to peak a check, that means you're able to get either full information or some information about what the reward will be for completing the check. Sometimes you can see a key, up on a ledge, and you just haven't gotten a chance to get there yet, but you know that it's a key. Sometimes you'll see the character poke their head out of a cave, and you'll know that, oh, well, a check that I can do in 30 minutes has that character. So a peek is anything that you get a little bit of information before you commit to the check. And go mode, that's when you have everything you need and you are ready to go face that final boss or whatever it is to finish the game. In Worlds Collide, that's enter the Kefka's Tower. In Free Enterprise, that's go fight Zeramis. Again, it depends on the game. Go mode is I've got everything I need and I am just going to leave this smoking trail of fire behind me as I blaze towards the finish. So again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, a randomizer, in general, it takes a game and it changes something about it. You will pick the flags, you will pick the options that you want, and then the randomizer will output a seed for you to play. Things that it can change: item locations, item statistics, character locations, enemy levels, stats. In Pokemon, it can change the type effectiveness chart, which I find absolutely brain-breaking, and I can't handle it.
I hate it.
It can randomize what moves your Pokemon learn. It can randomize where badges are. There are lots of different things that a randomizer can change, and it depends game to game what actually can be changed or not. You pick all of your options, the randomizer gives you a seed, and you go play your seed. So one of the things that the randomizer does sort of behind the scenes is each seed needs to have a logic to it. The randomizer has to make sure that if you need the hookshot to complete the game, the hookshot isn't hidden behind something you need the hookshot to get to. It has to be possible. Each seed should be fully completable, and I do use the word should in heavy air quotation marks. Have I absolutely broken seeds before? Yes, why would you ask me such a question? But in general, all seeds should be completable. And depending on the game, depending on your settings, there may be ways to break the logic that the randomizer is expecting you to go through, and that can give you time advantages, or you can just confuse the hell out of the game and yourself.
Like sequence breaking in Metroid or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you're in Time Spinner and you're struggle juggling up to get to a chest that you're not supposed to be able to get to till you get a double jump. There are ways to sequence break, but each randomizer will have logic built in. And typically it will talk about, sort of on the back end, talk about it in spheres. A sphere 0 is anything you can check at the very beginning. And then something in sphere 0 will lead you to sphere 1. It's the next set of checks that get opened up. So in some of these really long, complex games, you can have spheres 15, 17, 37, etc. But that's getting a little bit more technical than we, strictly speaking, need to be right now. So just a couple of screenshots from websites from the Free Enterprise and the Worlds Collide randomizer pages. As you can see on each of these, there are a lot of different options that you can pick from. And each website is going to be different based on its community and its needs. In the Worlds Collide one, you can see you can change battle settings and objectives and magic settings and party settings. And you can get in as deep as you want into this. And in Free Enterprise, you can be like, oh, do I want my chests to be vanilla, which is as it is in the basic game? Or do I want them shuffled together? Or do I want them completely randomized? You have all of these different options that you can choose from. Why do I love the randomizer? Well, hold on. Do you love randomizers?
Some days.
Okay.
Depends how the run goes.
Fair. So one of the reasons why I love randomizers so much is that I love playing these games. Final Fantasy VI is my favorite game of all time. I've played the ever-living heck out of it for a very long time. But a randomizer gives me an opportunity to play it again, but it's fresh and it's new and it's not the same thing. You know, sometimes you want to go back and play the old games and like, oh, I remember this, I know exactly what to do, I know where to go. But with a randomizer, I get to have a lot of that same experience, but it's still fresh and it's new and it's something different. You know, I'm still like exercising my brain and trying to figure things out, but I still get some of that nostalgia feeling. Randomizers in particular reward a deep game knowledge. The more you know about the game, the more sort of obscure interactions and like, oh, hey, I know that this rage from Gao, which is one of 255 that he can cast Stone or Doom, and that's going to be really good for this boss, when that would never come up in the vanilla game. Like, would literally never even cross anyone's mind or be a possibility. And I really like watching speedruns. I really hate doing them. I'm really bad at doing the same thing over and over again and doing that rote memorization and that sort of pixel perfect and frame perfect execution. Whereas I can race a randomizer and execution is still important, but it's not the main thing. It's not the main skill that's being utilized.
Yeah. So whenever anyone hears that I speedrun a randomizer, after I explain randomizer, they're like, how do you speedrun that? Anyone who has seen like Somebody Salt's history of videos or just any kind of records in general in sports, you know that progression is linear. As you work on something more and more, your average time is going to go down more. And it's very easy to equate. I got a faster time than yesterday. I did better. I set a PB. It's hard to do in a randomizer. To use an example, in a tournament a few months ago, 1 week, it was an 8-week-long tournament where you get points based on how you placed. And 1 week, I got a 142, and my average is a 125. It was the worst time I'd done in 6 months. It was horrendous. And I got 3rd place because everyone did bad. And then another week, I got a 118. It was way above my average. I'm like, I nailed it. And I go and check, 3rd place. So you can see that it's very hard if you have a bad time. Did you play bad, or was it God who hates you? A lot of times I blame the RNG gods, but it's hard sometimes then to improve upon that. So how do you deal with that? So this is a chart of a traditional speedrun. This is Mega Man X4 100%, a runner named Johnny Go, who I don't know what time he played, but he did MAGFest earlier this week. He did this game. And this is his, just all of his attempts. And you can see, obviously after a few attempts, he started getting better very quickly, and then it levels out. It's a little hard to see because of the outliers on the side, but it is a steady progression down with very low variance. He would finish a few minutes faster or slower any given attempt, but it is kind of what you expect as you're just practicing any skill over and over again. And here is my last 30 runs for Worlds Collide. As you can see, there is a slight downward trend, especially at the end there. But it's a lot harder to get anything like meaningful. Obviously, the variance is a lot higher, and if you're trying to look and just see, am I improving, or how am I doing compared to other runners? It's very hard to tell when you could get anywhere from a low 130 to the 115s or so. That's a very large range, and so we have to kind of figure out how do you start. How do you capture this? How do you capture, who is better than who? Because in speedruns, the world record is the holy grail. People grind leaderboards, right? And we don't quite do that. We instead race. So what that means is, Ravlin had mentioned flags earlier. Typically, you take a set of flags, and we call that a preset, and you generate a seed. And a seed is all the RNG that the randomizer dictates. What items are shuffled, where bosses are located, anything that a randomizer would randomize, that's captured in the seed. And that is different than the RNG the game would give you. And Pokemon, the randomizer seed's not going to dictate what the first Pokemon you find in a given route is. That's still going to be random based on however the game decides it's RNG. So Ravel and I can play the same Pokemon seed, and we'll be the same, maybe same Pokemon in each area, but I might get a different one on my first encounter than he would. So we have the same seed, and now that's a baseline. If Ravel and I race, and Ravelin does better than me, it's very clear he played better than I did. Maybe there's still some RNG, but he planned around that RNG, better than I did. And so that gives a baseline and standardizes times for us to be able to better compare amongst people. There are world records in randomizers. People set PBs. I set a PB earlier this week. But they're kind of de-emphasized because it's really hard without that normalization to kind of equate it. In Worlds Collide, the people who grind the world records, there's only a few of them, but it requires more reloading seeds and redoing attempts, just like a regular vanilla speed run, until they get that time. And with races, you can't reload. If you make a mistake or something bad happens, you're racing against someone else and they're going. So you got to rebound, you got to come up with a new plan and recover. So it's very different, but that's kind of how we measure, competitiveness in speedrunning randomizers is races. And so races have two types. We have what are called sync races, which is Ravel and I log on at the same time, we have our game up, we have our stream up, we get a 3, 2, 1, go, and we both hit start at the same time. Whoever finishes first, finishes. Just like you expect, just like you've seen in any race at GDQ or anything. And then we also have async races, which is maybe someone says, here's a seed, you have a week, run it on your own, record your time, don't peek people's streams, there's obviously a lot more honor code with it, and then at the end of the week we'll close it out and then see who finished first, second, third, all that. That's a lot more casual. It's typically pretty good when you want to have a race with a lot of people. For instance, that qualifier I mentioned in a tournament was a week-long async race. And also just, we have lives. I mean, Worlds Collide, most of us are in our mid-30s, a lot have kids. It's better to be able to do it on our own time because sometimes it's hard to coordinate, sitting down and doing a sync race. During a race, runners are unaware of any progress outside of whether or not someone has done in a sync race and in an async race too. So we don't know people's times, we don't know people's paces. If I'm doing an async race and someone told me, hey Brian, I finished with a 1:30, that's a spoiler, because now I can decide whether the seed was harder or easier, and maybe I start making metagame decisions. So we don't talk about a seed at all until you've finished, and then you talk with people who have actually run the seed. Yes, we have a question.
An async race, would you run it multiple times to try to improve your time, or you do a one and done?
So the question is if in an async race you'd run it multiple times or if it's one and done. Typically in all the communities I've been in, it's been a one and done. It's you run it as soon, once you know things about it, you've essentially spoiled yourself on the seed from playing it again. So be ready,
Yep.
Do your one.
And we use stuff like Discord bots in order to kind of manage all this so people can start at the same time, and this way there's spoiler rooms when you finish a race, that sort of stuff, where you can discuss among other people finish what the seed was like. A lot of communities host a lot of different kinds of tournaments that are made up of either sync or async races. Sometimes they can vary on structure, such as single or double elimination, battle royales. Sometimes they can be gimmicks. I've seen co-op ones. I think the Link to the Past Randomizer community is doing a swordless tournament right now. And that's kind of cool because it really freshens things up a lot, so people don't get, it doesn't get stale. You would think you would think that since it's a randomizer and it's different each time, why would you ever get bored? You do, and you get burnt out, and sometimes just even mixing up how the game is played, it makes it a lot more fun. So we talked about racing, we talked about how we now keep track of our times and our scores. So let's talk about skill sets for speedrunning randomizers. Ravel had mentioned that regular vanilla speedruns of a regular game are about execution. There is a route. That runners have a plan to go through the game. They know they're doing these levels in order, they're fighting these bosses in order, they're doing these dungeons in order. That route is planned ahead of time by the runner, by their general community of the game, and is determined that this is the most optimal route. In Super Metroid, the most optimal route is to kill Kraid, then Fantoon, and then the water boss I never remember, and then Ridley. And that's what they do. And therefore, it's more about doing that perfect, you know. And so if they mess up a trick, they reset. And that it's a skill set I don't have. Both the attention span and just the mechanical thing of, you know, being as good with some of these games and just being able to nail these tricks over and over again. Randomizers are different. Randomizers, there are a lot of other skills that go into speedrunning and randomizer. And we're going to go in detail about all 4 of these in a minute. But it's about analyzing risk/reward decision making, figuring out your route through the game, how you're going to move, be able to interpret data that's going to change on each seed and act accordingly. And then, as Ravlin talked about, the deep game knowledge of your game in general to be able to adapt. So, with speedrunning, even vanilla, when coming up with a route, you're trying to balance the fastest time possible with making sure that you can actually complete the game or complete the trick. If you've watched GDQ, you'll see people say this is a marathon safe strat. It means that in a real speedrun, the fastest way has a high failure rate. And they don't want to fail in the marathon and then maybe ruin their time, so instead they take a slower but safer approach. We do something very similar in randomizers. All the time we are deciding when trying to do something, whether we're going to check a chest, go into a shop, go to a location, we're trying to decide, will this let me beat the game faster? Ideally, in like a Link to the Past randomizer, if you need 10 items to beat the game, in an ideal world, you opened only 10 chests and each one just had the exact item you need, and then you just went and played the game as fast as possible. But that's obviously not how it works. That's not how math works, not how statistics works. And so you need to be able to decide when doing something, what are the odds this will give me something that lets me beat the game faster if what I'm doing is optional. So, example, there's a chest. It's 30 seconds out of the way to go get. Doesn't sound like a lot, right? But in a Link to the Past randomizer, there's 122 chests. If you go and check 20 chests that are all 30 seconds out of the way, and none of them have items, that is what? I don't know. Well, that's multiple minutes, you know, gone where you didn't get anything of value, right? So obviously, well, why don't you just skip it, right? Obviously, you know, you risk it. Maybe there's nothing good in there. That could be a solid plan. Let's kind of see that in action and see what kind of happens with that. So this is from GDQX. This is a co-op randomizer showcase of a Link to the Past Super Metroid combo randomizer. So both games are randomized, but you can swap between games. So items in one game could be in another. You might find the bow from Zelda in Norfair in Super Metroid. And this is Andy, who is the best Link to the Past speedrunner, and Oats and Ghost, the best Super Metroid speedrunner. They're playing their respective games, so they pass the controller off. Oats and Goats is in Go mode. He has every item to beat Super Metroid. Andy is almost in Go mode. He might have every item to beat the game. He's going to go to the final dungeon. First, you're going to see him skip a chest a few minutes before, and then he's going to go to the final dungeon where he goes into the basement, and in the basement, he wants to find a key that will let him into the top part of the dungeon so he can beat the game. And there are 22 places it can be, and he can reach 21 of them. There's one place that he doesn't have the item for. So he's gambling that the key is not in the one place that he can't reach. So let's maybe see what kind of happens, and pay attention to the clock.
This is what we call foreshadowing.
I'm sure it's one of those games that, like, if you mess up your movement, you just look like the biggest idiot. It's like jumping up to a ledge but not jumping high enough, so you just drop back
like
down.
I did multiple times, and
Yeah, that's a regular thing for me, and it's just like, man, it's so frustrating.
yeah. So here's Ganon's tower.
Yep. So in the basement here, you need the big key to go upstairs. There are 22 chests down here that can have the big key in it.
So put in the chat what number you think it'll be.
Yeah,
and if you get it right, Andy will give you a free sub to his channel.
Oh yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And if you pick one or two, oh my God.
Okay.
That's really bad. All right, well.
1 hour later.
All right. Oh. And see, okay, so funny thing about that chest, I specifically didn't do that one because I didn't have the boots, and it's slower without the boots.
You're real slow, Andy.
So, did Andy make the right decision there? I still think yes. If he played that seed, those flag sets 100 more times, that would probably never happen again. You know, it had to be in one of 22 places, and he had to not have the boots. And there are, 122 chests in A Link to the Past, and I think 250 in Super Metroid. So the odds that it was one of the chests he skips was very, very low. I actually asked Andy's permission if I could show this clip, and he told me that he would make that decision the same way every single time. But unfortunately, occasionally, rando's gonna rando, and that's the most extreme example I could find of it. But those are the kind of risks that you do run by maybe trying to save time in places. Another example would be in Worlds Collide. We have 8 optional dragons that you do not have to fight to beat the game. They give a whole bunch of experience. They can help you learn magic very quickly, and you get a random but very good weapon or armor by beating them. But they're normally out of the way. Even the fastest ones, you'd still probably take 45 seconds to go and fight and finish the battle and stuff like that. And they make enemies throughout the game harder. So how many do you kill? Do you kill 0? Well, you might end up being a little lower level, and the last boss might be harder, and therefore it takes you longer to beat. Do you kill 5? That just might be a waste of time. You might be getting more experience than you need, and that ultimately probably didn't save you time come the final boss. And so we have to kind of make those judgment calls as we're playing and figure out what you feel comfortable, what you think you can get away with.
Right, because what's right in one seed will be wrong in the next one.
Yeah, there is no hard and fast rule to a lot of these things.
And so one of the other things we like about racing is what I call the any given Sunday effect. Like, for people who watch football, you know that even if the team that's, 0-7 is going against the 7-0 team, that 0-7 team can still win. It is possible. That's why we play the game. That's why we run the races. And if I know that I am racing against somebody who is better, like if I were going into a race against Seto right now, Seto has better execution than me. He has more practice than I do right now. Like, if I'm going in that race, I might start making some of these suboptimal choices. Or if I know his play style, like I know he's never going to go to Fnatic's tower. So I'm going to go peek that because maybe that'll give me an advantage. So even in those races, when you're trying to do that, if I know I'm at a disadvantage, I'm going to start making different choices to try to eke out whatever advantage I can. Because I know in a straight execution race, I'm probably going to lose.
And that's something that happens all the time. I play differently if I'm just doing practices than if I'm racing. Sometimes I get in my own head of like, did my opponent go here? Well, what if he checked here? What if he didn't check? What if I'm checking this place and there's nothing and he didn't check it? But sometimes you do come up with strategies based off of what's happening with your opponents. I was in a tournament that was a battle royale. You were separated into groups, and each week only the last place person was eliminated. So all you had to do was not get last each week. And I knew, because of how the seeding worked, they try to seed it evenly. So there was a mixture of experienced people and not experienced people, and I knew that there were some newer players in our group. And I knew I just didn't have to get last. And the seed was very difficult, and I was struggling I was like, I don't know if I can beat the last boss right now. And I elected to go and spend 10 whole minutes going getting more powerful stuff, which I would never have done a head-to-head race. Head-to-head race, I'd be like, I gotta just try to beat the final boss. 10 minutes is way too a time loss. But I knew I could probably get away with it with some of the people left, because I knew I did not have to get first, I just had to get last. And that changed my entire approach to that race. So the second thing is, we talked about routing. I mentioned before that every speedrun has a route, but in a vanilla game, that route is determined beforehand. They've done research to figure out the most optimal route. When new glitches happen, a vanilla speedrun might change their route. Every once in a while you hear about in a vanilla speedrun, people have an epiphany and realize, no, actually we were wrong with our math originally when we figured out a new route. But we don't have that in randomizers. Our route is different each time. What items we get might dictate where we can go. What characters we can get might dictate what dungeons are available to us. Some games have your requirements change. In A Link to the Past, you only have to finish 7 of the 10 dungeons, but those are picked randomly, which means 2 seeds, you're going to be playing completely different dungeons. So which ones you go to, what order, all change based on what you have found and what you've already done. And so we have to kind of figure out what the most optimal way from going A to B is. And there's a lot of criteria that can go into why you might pick one place for the next location over another. And it's not as simple as this place is closer. And I'll give a quick example on the next slide about that, but there are a lot of things we have to consider. But we do know that at the end, most randomizers have the same end state. So you are starting the same at the very beginning, and you can go anywhere, and you're typically doing all these different things, but you're going to end up in the same final dungeon. You're going to fight the same final boss. You know where you're going to end up, you just don't know how you're going to get there. So here's 2 examples. Don't feel like you need to understand everything with the slide. I just wanted to show, these are all different properties of 2 different checks in Worlds Collide. And when I'm trying to decide where to go, I might be deciding between these 2. The first one doesn't have a boss fight, but I have to fight 5 to 6 regular enemies on an auto-scroller, which means the game's gonna move itself, and I could go on my phone and stuff like that and not look at the screen. That's slow. But I don't have to fight a boss. And at the end, I end up in a town where maybe I can do some shopping or looting. Buying stuff early is better than buying stuff late, because if I find a good item early, I can get more value out of it. So this might be a good check for me to do at the beginning of the game, when I might need experience in those fights. It can be useful, where I don't feel strong enough to kill a boss. I might do this early. Late game though, it's just a waste of time. I want to be going on and getting into go mode, and be able to having to sit through 3 minutes where I'm putting my controller down is slow. Second example being a location where there are more rewards than normal. But there are multiple bosses that don't have save points before them, or have save points multiple minutes ahead. So if you die to any of these bosses, you might have to redo minutes of gameplay or redo other boss fights. So it's very high risk, high reward. If you mess up, you're gonna get multiple minutes of time loss. But if you do all of it perfectly, you're gonna get a lot of rewards. So I need to kind of decide, what do I feel comfortable with my equipment loadout and characters and levels. And you can start seeing how these aren't easy questions to answer, and there's no right answer. Hard and fast rule, you always do floating continent, you always use Serpent's Trench. It depends. And so we had mentioned, this is kind of a recap of some of the stuff we had mentioned, that your requirements and objectives change on every seed you generate with all these randomizers. And your path will change. You find, in Link to the Past, if you find the tight instruments early, you can pull up heavier boulders and get the areas you couldn't before. You might find it in the first 5 minutes in one seed, and now open up a whole other thing. Another seed, you might not find it until the 45-minute mark. And so therefore, you have to go to different areas because you don't have that item yet. So what you're finding is it's going to change things drastically, and you have to know how all that interacts, and and figure out where to go. So in a normal speed run, things are mostly known or controlled. There's normally not a lot of RNG with a vanilla speed run. Either the RNG is manipulated, or they figured out routes to eliminate it or reduce it heavily, because they don't want to reset constantly if they get screwed over by some bad luck. And therefore, a lot of times, let's say you're watching a Final Fantasy speed run, they're not looking at their screen and saying, oh, I need a potion. Where's the potion? Okay, well, there it is. Let me select it. They know their potion's always in the third slot of their items, because their route had them put it there. So they don't even have to look. They know they can hit down A to get to the third slot. If anyone's seen any of the Final Fantasy 7, 8, or 9 GDQ runs, they always do a blindfolded menuing incentive, where someone puts a blindfold on and does 45 minutes of moving things around a menu, because he hasn't memorized the number of button presses. We don't have that. We're gonna find different items in each seed, which means our inventory is gonna look different. Shops are gonna have different items in them from seed to seed. We have to be able to read it, understand it, and also execute it, because if we stop and look at it and try to memorize it, well, that's time lost. That's time we're not moving. So let's kind of maybe see that in action of just pay attention how quickly I look through some of these menus, and then I'll kind of break down maybe a little bit what's that's like in my head.
All right, cool. Let's go. 3, 2, 1, and go.
All right, so what game is this? All right, so Final Fantasy VI Worlds Collide, Randomizer. Anyone who is familiar with Final Fantasy VI, prepare to be extremely confused. So Randomizer, for those of you who are not familiar, there's a lot of changes that have been made to this game using procedural generation, using all of the assets and ideas from the original game, but there's lots of weird stuff happening. Characters aren't where they're supposed to be, items aren't where they're supposed to be. The plot doesn't really make any sense, which is fine because I've never.
And just to be clear, you've never seen these item menus before,
No,
right?
I mean, or if I have, it was hundreds of seats ago. I'm not remembering every permutation.
Well, let's do a really brief Reader's Digest version of the plot of Final Fantasy VI. There was magic.
I don't know the order of those items in this, what I'm selling are either, which is why you saw me go down and then up, because I realized, oh, actually, I scrolled past the thing I probably want to sell. Because I know the pricing, how much each of those items that I'm selling are worth, because I've played this enough times, so I know I want to sell this one because it's worth more so I can buy this thing I just saw. A lot of that took practice. Obviously I've been doing this for 2 years and everything. So you saw at the beginning, I looked at the character status screen real quick, and I cycled between all three, really quickly. And there's a lot of info here. And so what did I see to be able to go that quickly? Because there's a lot here, the process. I'm only looking at that. I care what character I have, because that's going to dictate where I can go. I care what ability, because abilities are powerful, and some abilities require me to buy stuff from shops, such as tools. And I care about magic power, because all the other stats really don't impact damage nearly that much, but magic power, higher magic, results in a lot more damage. So that's all I'm doing when I was cycling through very quick. Same thing with the shop menus. I'm looking for maybe 4 total kinds of weapons. So instead of reading through each one of those, I'm just checking to see, is it one of the things I care about? And if not, it's white noise to me, and I just skip on by. And so different runners develop different techniques to be able to process this data, quicker. The pinpoint, these are the things I actually care about here, instead of having to stop and, just take everything in. There's no reason for it.
So one of the other ways that we handle this sort of data processing and cognitive load issue is that a lot of people in randomizers will use a tracker. And that's literally a program that either you can use manually, or you can hook it through your emulator and it will read the information and update automatically. And it will help you keep track of what do you have, where have you gone, what have you done. And that's just one of the tools that we use to reduce that cognitive load, because there's a lot of decision making you have to do. And if I'm playing a seed without a tracker, I forget what I did 10 minutes ago, and I will end up revisiting the same dungeon 3 times. I've done it multiple times. So just as an example, here's a link to the past. Anything that's lit up is something that they already have. The numbers are for each of those dungeons, how many chests are left in that dungeon. Like if you need to, retrace your steps and find something, you can sort of aim for the highest density. And then on the other side, green are places that are totally open. Orange, you can peek.
But you can't get, you can peek.
Right, you can peek and find out what it is, but you can't get it. And red is like, yeah, no, not really a useful place for you to go right now.
And it will procedurally, in this tracker, if you get a new item, like if you get the hook shot, you would click on it and it would light up, and then the map would change, now update where you can now go now you have the hook shot, which is really great for people starting out and running a Link to the Past randomizer.
Yeah. And another example from Worlds Collide, this will keep track of characters that are lit up, are the characters that you have. The symbols next to them are represent what checks they open. So for example, Gao opens finding Gao on the Veld and the Serpent's Trench, and if they are lit up, that means you've already done it. And I use this every single time as a way to figure out, okay, I've already done Realms check, I don't need to go there. Terra has a bunch of checks, I'm gonna start cycling through those.
So the last point, and Ravon talked about this at the beginning, is deep game knowledge. To be a broken record, vanilla speedruns have a pre-planned route. And a lot of times vanilla speedrunners might not be completely comfortable with things that aren't on that route. I've seen speedruns where like sometimes speedrunners like, I don't know how to fight this boss because they always skip it. There's some glitch they can skip the boss. They don't know the real way to fight it. They don't know the boss's attacks or anything like that. Why would they? It's not knowledge they need to do what they want to do. There could be items that are slower and therefore they never touch at all, and so they don't know how they work. We don't have that luxury in randomizers. We have to use whatever the game is giving us. Sometimes we get the best weapon in the game in the first few minutes. Other times we struggle and we are being very creative with our offense or where we're going or whatever the case may be. And so we have to know a lot of like things about interactions, how different items work with each other, how different items work with enemies. And there's a lot of different ways this can happen. So like in the Link to the Past randomizer, in regular Link to the Past, you get a sword in the first 30 seconds. It's right there at the beginning, and you never have to go through the game without a sword. But did you know you can beat every boss in the game without a sword? It sucks and everything, but like a lot of them can be hit with hammers. You can use bombs, you can use fire rods. We mentioned earlier, the Link Past Randomizer is having a swordless tournament going on right now. And for instance, you might have a boss with your sword, you swipe in front of you and you're hitting this nice arc in front of you, but now you gotta use the hammer, which maybe hits only this far in front of you and not in an arc, which means it's harder to hit the enemy that is moving, and if they touch you, you get hurt, and you have to get closer to them to use the hammer. So suddenly your boss strategies change a lot based on what items you have. Sometimes you might have items that you weren't supposed to have in vanilla, and therefore you can beat that boss even quicker. In the Super Metroid Randomizer, areas that you would need the high jump boots for in vanilla, maybe you now have to bomb jump to in order to get, because you don't have the high jump boots yet. And this also can impact just not even like, different strategies, but like how you move, how you get through the game. If Link to the Past, a lot of items can be hookshot to and you pull yourself towards. So if you have the hookshot, how you move is going to be different. You need to know what things you can even grab and get used to, okay, well I walk in this area, this thing's here, I gotta turn left and I can hookshot that, and now I save 2 seconds doing that instead of walking over. If you have the Pegasus boots, you can dash, but it has about a second or two of build-up. So you need to know, okay, I can only dash in these locations because they're longer, because if I pick a short hallway and dash, I probably actually wasted more time instead of standing there and revving up before I moved. And in Worlds Collide, different attacks have different animations. Using a physical attack is about, I think, a third of a second animation, whereas casting a spell is close to about 5 seconds for even the quickest spell. And so knowing I have these attacks available to me, and here are the animation times. Oh, Flare does a lot of damage? That's great. Flare takes 12 seconds to cast. Maybe I'll pick the thing that does a little less damage than Flare, but takes a tenth of the time, right? Because overall that means I will beat the game faster even though I am doing less damage with that attack. Having that knowledge of all the animations of anything you might come across will help you beat the game faster. So we're gonna look at a few examples. This first one is a optional enemy that can drop a really, really, really good item. So if you find him, you might be incentivized to kill him instead of running. He is also very powerful. He will kill you. He has very powerful attacks. In here, we have an ability called Sketch, which when used on an enemy, the enemy does an attack on itself. Every enemy in the game has a different attack when you sketch it. There are 255 regular enemies and 30 bosses. So there are 280 different abilities. So if you know what this enemy's sketch ability is, that could be useful. Sketch also is not a useful ability, so most of us don't know these because it doesn't really come up. Except in this case, it kind of does, because he's able to use this to, well, we'll see in a second.
Done.
So if you have Sketch and you run into him, you know you can instantly kill him. Or if you can cause confusion, you can also instantly kill him as well. And got a lot of money and a nice reward from it. So that is an example of like knowledge that is not used in vanilla speedrun because Sketch is horrible, so they don't have to worry about it, nearly as much.
I mean, and in vanilla games, Sketch can literally break everything.
Yes. I didn't use it as a kid. I was afraid I would ruin my dad's game if I used it.
Yeah. No, don't.
So this next example, and it's going to sound silly at first, which is in this boss fight, halfway through, the boss gains the reflect and the image status. Reflect will nullify all magic. Image will make physical attacks very, very hard to hit. There are still attacks that you potentially could do that ignore these rules. And if you have them, that's great. But if you don't, you might find yourself in a position where it's very hard to damage the boss. Dispel is an ability that removes spell effects. And it sounds obvious, right? Oh yeah, of course, use Dispel to remove those. Have you ever used Dispel in FF6?
No, not even once.
I've used it when the enemy casts Stop on me. Most of the time you don't have Dispel. You might not have it in a given seed. But also, FF6 is a game where the fastest strategy normally is just to attack your opponent. Why waste your turn casting Dispel if you could attack? Because odds are that'll result in you finish the battle quicker. So we don't think about using that at all. And Javaneer here, who's a very, very good runner, not only thinks that, it is a pre-planned thing, you'll see.
Unless I have Dispel or something, which I don't think I do. I do have Dispel. Interesting. We're going to use Dispel on purpose. Hopefully all is good. Still a pretty scary boss. I'm just gonna leave Realm chillin', I think, on Retort and let Terra do the damage for now.
This is where the status effects
so
apply.
let's see if this works. The spell should take off all of his stuff, so he shouldn't have image anymore, which means Terra should be able to hit. Yep.
And you'll hear him say, this should work. FF6 in general is a game that has very hard and fast rules or mechanics. And if you understand the mechanics, you're like, okay, here's how these items should interact. Except also a lot of them decide they don't want to, and a lot of them have special rules, and none of it makes any sense at all. And so having to memorize all that can be really, really difficult. So he didn't actually know if that worked, but he knew enough about it that he was like, I'm pretty sure this should be successful, and that saved them a lot of time compared to just swinging and hoping the attacks hit. And the last example is a little bit of a twist on game knowledge. This is not more about a strategy, but more to show that with randomizers and when you're shuffling and changing these things, you can get into states that are not in vanilla, very unexpected states. This involves an ability called Possess, which normally we don't use in Worlds Collide. But this was a practice race for a special tournament that was a little more gimmicky, and this was a possibility to use this ability. In regular Final Fantasy VI, Possess is an ability that a temporary character called a Ghost has, who joins you for only one dungeon. You don't see him the entire rest of the game. He can't leave that dungeon. So you cannot use it anywhere, this ability anywhere besides that dungeon. It automatically kills whatever it targets, but also automatically permanently removes the ghost from the game. You can never get him back.
And you might not even get the ghost in vanilla. You don't even have to get him. It is completely optional.
Right. So the developers, because FF6 is not a very well-developed game, it's very buggy, they forgot to program immunity to anything in the game for this ability. Why would they? You can't use it anywhere besides this one dungeon. And for the most part, that's true. The only way to use this ability outside of that dungeon is involving a glitch that takes like 10 hours to pull off. So
don't bother.
Yeah, it's funny. Find me offline. I'll send you a write-up someone did that shows how cool this glitch is. But it doesn't come up in speedruns. And therefore, we kind of forgot that that you could use it and maybe that it might cause some problems. So let's go see what happens to me when I do something with it.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. I forgot to heal with lock afterwards, like a
Hey! There we go. That was so dumb of me.
You're too good.
Thanks, Gogo. What's the hit rate on Possessed? Is like 40% or something?
That's what it feels like. That's good. That was good.
Wait, so does this count as a win?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no. Does it? It depends. Does the animation happen at the end?
I got a flash. No.
I didn't think about that. Nope, that's game over. Tragic.
So in Worlds Collide, we call time when the flash of the boss happens to indicate that he died. That happened. I mean, you saw me stop the timer, right? The game over happened afterwards, but I got a game over. So we saw the thing that we call time on, but we didn't see the credits. Was it a win? Was it not? We didn't know, actually. And thank God I found this in a practice, and this wasn't a real tournament race, because the tournament administrator had you come up with a ruling mid-tournament to account for this, because it was obviously a very real possibility if you have no one alive. And it was kind of cool to like change the rules of a tournament due to an edge case no one knew about, because this can't happen in the regular game. None of us even thought about the possibility of this scenario. And I wasn't even trying to do it. I messed up, and that was the only thing I could do. That kind of just shows that sometimes it can be very kind of complicated. Yes, there's a question?
I never played Final Fantasy VI.
Mm-hmm.
Was there supposed to be commentary?
That was a special mod for it called a music randomizer, where it picks different music from other Super Nintendo and PlayStation RPGs that are appropriate to this section. So like for boss fights, you might get a boss music from Chrono Cross as an example, and for a dungeon, you might get a Final Fantasy IV dungeon theme. When we play hundreds of seeds, sometimes the music gets to you a little bit, and it was like a way to kind of change it up and all that, just like for fun.
Truth be told, I didn't even notice it was different music.
Oh, really?
I did not even clock that.
Fun fact, I think that was the very first time I ever used a music mod. Too.
Huh.
Because I didn't know how it worked, and Kel, the other guy on the line, like was telling me how it worked and everything. So we're gonna get into questions real quick, but I do want to have a few thank yous. Thank you to Opal Deuce, George Rowland for a lot of the video editing and graphics. Thank you for the Swans for giving feedback and providing one of the videos. Thank you to Double Down for some of the graphics and feedback. Javanator for the clip you guys saw. Andy for my favorite clip in the presentation and being a good sport about it. Johnny Go for providing me his times for Mega Man X4, and Kelby also for writing the FF6 tracker and having a little cameo in that last clip there.
Thank you. Do you guys have some questions for us?
Thank you. Yeah, we have a question?
So the question is about co-op randomizer speedruns. Do we ever do them, and sort of what are our thoughts? I've done them a couple of times. It sort of depends. I usually will end up doing them with a very high challenge seed. So, you know, if we're doing a co-op run together, it'll be like, you know, you go to the floating continent and I'll go to the Serpent's Trench, and then we'll compare notes and see who made the better choice, and if, you know, do I need to go to the floating continent? Does he need to go to Serpent's Trench? It's not something I have a huge amount of experience with, but could be fun.
It's something I love and I want to do more with. I've run a few Worlds Collide events that have been co-op races. So like one is both players have to finish their seeds, but they're playing the same seed, but they're playing independently, and they both have to finish. And this lets players, maybe one person go to a longer dungeon to scout to see if it's worth it, while the other person does the more optimal stuff, and they're relaying information back and forth. Another one I've done is called a navigator race, where one person's playing, and the other person gets the spoilers log. It's a text file that the seed can generate if you want to, that tells you where everything is. And so that person has to read this giant log of where every item is, every boss, all that, and then try to tell the person who's running, hey, go here, this is the most optimal route. You want to go to here and check these things and communicate real time. There's a few other ideas that I have in mind of co-op races I want to do because I love them. I think people have a blast whenever we play them.
Yeah, and I think one of the other ones that we've done has been like a mentor-mentee race to help people who are new to the community come in.
We had a big tournament actually recently for that, yeah.
So we'll pair someone like Seto with someone who's brand new, so you sort of have a mentor who's going to like kind of look over your shoulder and sort of like talk you through the thought process and help you through a seed. So you're not necessarily playing together, but you're still working together co-op.
And that was a huge success because we did that right after GDQ and we had a huge influx of users. And like everyone felt great about themselves because all the new people got to really not only learn but really see themselves grow over the course of an entire tournament. And like from my understanding, a lot of them had a blast, which was like really cool to hear.
Yeah.
We might have time for one more question if there's any other questions. Oh, yes.
So there are trackers that hook through a Lua script. Usually it's BizHawk. I'm now talking way above my programming knowledge. Is it possible for them to like fully read the RAM and like give you a spoiler log effectively and you know give you an unfair advantage? Yes, but nobody does that because what's the point? Like,
I've heard they exist, like full RAM dumps and everything. But that, like Ravelin said. With Lua scripts, a lot of times you can have the emulator send events to a tracker. So like with Worlds Collide, you can run a script that will sit there and every time you get a new character or a new Esper or finish a dungeon, it will automatically update your tracker for you. But it won't say give you information about enemies' current HP. Since enemies level up as you level up in that game, you might not know at a given time this enemy has 5k HP. I've heard there are tools that can dump that memory and like tell you live, but those are banned from, like, they're banned in all of our tournaments and all our official stuff because that's way too, a bridge too far and everything.
And I am getting the cutoff signal. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.